Hi! This time I wanted to talk about the importance of being flexible, adaptable when using tabletop role-playing game rules. I have made a video where I talk about the difference between role-playing game rules and board game rules. I'm going to put the link in the description. I think that this flexibility has a lot to do with the origins of tabletop role-playing games, specifically the way that Dave Arneson used to play tabletop RPGs. That's one of the points of contention or conflict between that existed between Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. Dave was pure creative chaos. He never applied the same rule the same way. You always had this sense, according to the descriptions of the people who have played with Dave Arneson, according to the historical records and all of that, people were very excited because you never knew how Dave Arneson was going to apply a rule for a particular situation. Every single instance within a single encounter felt like its own thing, its own original thing. And I think that sometimes in current sessions, in current times, people sometimes get a bit too stuck on the rules. I personally think that in a tabletop role-playing game, the rules, and that is the game part and the role-playing part, they should be in a symbiotic relationship where they benefit from each other. The rules benefit, the game aspect benefits from roleplay, and roleplay benefits from the game. I think that many interesting mechanics and variations may be born from this understanding. You could say that many tabletop role-playing games were born because of variations, homebrewed mechanics and such from the first tabletop role-playing games. So somebody was playing Dungeons and Dragons or Metamorphosis Alpha, Gamma World, perhaps even Tunnels and Trolls, and perhaps they thought that a particular mechanic was not able to handle a situation adequately, or something was not covered in the book. And this makes sense because role-playing games are so complex, so deep. They try to simulate this fictional reality as much as possible. So people were obviously modifying, tweaking the first RPG systems, and so many other RPGs were born from that. So that's a great spirit to perpetuate. On the side of a player, you can work with whatever skill that you have, any feat, any edge, or the absence of them. You know, for example, many that play old school Renaissance style of RPGs, and that's not the majority in my opinion. There are still many that are having a Mother May I conversation. They do not actually play a tabletop role-playing game. Immersion is completely killed in their games. It's always about, can my character do this? Can my character do that? And for those of you that haven't seen the difference between role-playing and acting, please check out the link in the description as well. But like I said, let's say that the best the best gamers in the OSR, they always try to promote that immersion of interacting with the game world. But when a particular thing is not covered by the system of their choice, then they come up with a ruling, or a new rule is born at that very moment. Personally, when it comes to, for example, searching for traps, if one of my players comes up with a creative and inventive solution when it comes to disarming a trap or device or whatever, I do not ask for a roll. That's why I always like it when modules have this explanation of how a particular mechanism works. If the player, let's say that there is this trap that can be deactivated by pulling out a certain book, and the player is doing that, then the trap is deactivated. You don't need to roll. The rules are there to support the immersion. You need to feel as if you are actually interacting with the game world. I feel that this is the true Arnesian spirit from Dave Arneson. I could also say that that's one of the points that made it so that Gary and Dave didn't get exactly along. Gary was more like ordered rules, structured rules, and Dave was more like I said, this creative chaos that was not easy to communicate. Maybe if Dave Arneson had a better way of communicating his concept, perhaps Dungeons and Dragons would have been a very different game, who knows? I still appreciate the wargame rules or wargame elements that Gary Gygax put into the system. That is, I think it benefits the game side of things. And although some may deny that there is no influence, for example, Rob Kuntz said that wargames were never taken into account when designing Dungeons and Dragons, but that's a bit suspicious, right? But yes, when it comes to this aspect, the player is encouraged to actually immerse himself or herself within this fictional setting, and also to be creative with the way that he or she is using the rules, the skills, the powers, the feats, or the absence of them. There are many people that sometimes dismiss tabletop RPGs because a particular stat is so powerful. It was, yes, Mechton. I haven't played Mechton in like 8 years perhaps, but if I remember that there was this thing, I don't remember if it was dexterity or agility, but there is a stat that basically turns your character into a super pilot. So obviously everyone is going to put everything into that stat. They're going to prioritize that stat because that's the main thing that allows you to be an efficient and effective mecha pilot. But that's a very narrow-minded way of doing things. I immediately explained this to my players, and they used all of their other skills and stats to triumph during the sessions. Players that were not particularly dexterous or agile, they started to try to hack into the mechas of the opposing forces. Those that were a bit more charismatic, they used their social attacks, so to speak, to play mind games with the enemy. You know how it's typical in mecha battles that sometimes they exchange comments through radio and such, and there have been many moments in fiction. For example, Batman is a bit famous for playing mind games with his opponents. There was this animated film, was it? I don't remember the name, but it's when Batman and Superman, they are kind of like the enemies of the law. Lex Luthor took control of things and they are like the villains, but they are actually the heroes. And in that particular battle, Batman defeats one of the super villains just by playing mind games. Batman is just hiding behind stuff and he's like saying things that are very uncomfortable for the enemy, and that causes his demise. And so when it comes to games like Mechaton, where you have a single stat that is very important for combat, use another stat, another skill. If the game master is a true game master in an actual tabletop role-playing game, he is going to give you some benefits for that. So let's say you have a poor skill when it comes to, or yes, dexterity, agility, when it comes to piloting your mecha, but you can play mind games with your opponent. Maybe you start to, yes, like have those uncomfortable communication attacks, and the enemy gets some heavy penalties. So it kind of balances things out. The enemy is not attacking as useful or as effective as he would normally would because of your the comments. Maybe you are attacking his cause, his reason to fight against you. He's hesitating, he's wavering, he's not very sure about if he should be fighting against you, and this applies a penalty to his attacks and gives you a bonus instead. So that's the flexibility of using the rules in a tabletop RPG. You are not confined. Even if the book tells you, oh, this skill or this stat or this power is the best for this, or it's for this particular activity, etc. Think about creative ways of using anything else about your character. That way you're not going to feel yes, limited, obligated to create a particular character. You can create the character that you want to play as. Combat is truly an amazing moment to practice this flexibility. Let's say that you are playing a D20 system where you are fighting against two enemies and another enemy is a bit too far away, and there is cover between you and the other enemy, but you are having a gunfight with the current enemy. and you win that fight, but the enemy is wounding you. Perhaps a few gunshots grazed you, you have like a hurt shoulder, perhaps close to your ribs, and the other enemy is watching the whole thing, but he's still not within the proper position to attack you. But you could tell the game master, I want to play dead. When the shot hits me, I'm going to fall. In order to surprise the enemy. So maybe you don't have a particular subsystem for that. Use bluffing or any sort of deceit if you don't have a particular skill for that. Use the charisma check or whatever. Roll under your charisma. Perhaps modified by the others and other characters' perception. So you kill the enemy, you fall down dead because apparently he killed you. You make your roll and you pray that it's a successful check, because now the other enemy is approaching you and you want to bet it all on surprising the enemy. So let's say that you were successful in your check, the other enemy approaches you, and suddenly you get up a bit and you start shooting at the enemy. The dungeon master or game master should apply a heavy penalty to the enemy's armor class or give you a huge bonus when it comes to attack or damage. It's all about the situation. I also think that it's a good idea to get a bit carried away by the excitement. So let's say that the character did a great job killing that other enemy and he is wounded, the hit points are low. You should reward that creative idea. Perhaps an automatic success depending on the mindset of the other enemy. If the other enemy is like a grunt type of character, somewhat not very insightful, you could give an automatic success. Perhaps you kill him right then and there, like in real life. If you confidently walk towards an enemy that you think is dead, and suddenly he starts to shoot at you, and he's probably going to kill you. Quite likely. Like I said, it's all about the context in the Dave Arneson style about that particular instance in the encounter. Maybe some of you are going to handle the things like with a saving throw or some other mechanic. Now, when it comes to dungeon master and game master or referee, you also need to be mindful of this. Keep in mind that the players are always at great risk. They can be killed by enemies, by hazards. They can fail in social interactions. So it's a good idea to give them a chance, an opportunity to try out that idea. If it's too absurd, at the very least, give them a check. If it's not too sorry, if it's just simply nonsense, then do not allow it. It's an automatic failure. Like I said in a previous video, if the character wants to jump into the lava, that character is going to either die, or depending on how super heroic the RPG is, that character is going to take a lot of damage. So it's all about that. There are many creative ways in order to apply skills, feats, anything. Don't feel limited by the rules system. Give priority to the fiction that is being created through roleplay. Thank you for watching this video. I would love to know your comments on this, on the flexibility that you have applied when it comes to RPG rules. That's the main difference that I mentioned in my other video of the difference between board game rules and tabletop RPG rules. They give you so much freedom when it comes to applying things. They give general descriptions, unlike a board game. They don't tell you like, oh, this spell or this feat or power, it does 5 points of damage. That's it. No, here they tell you all of the details, that if you run a certain number of meters, you can apply this bonus to your attack, but you get this penalty to defense. Or if you use this spell, the temperature lowers about this low, you're able to freeze this and that. You also deal damage, but this spell also has an effect on the wave or whatever magic environment, etc. All of those small details are open to interpretation in order for the players and the game master to come up with creative solutions for any situation within the adventure or scenario. So yes, please let me know your thoughts on this or any other comments or questions. Thank you for your comments as always, and thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.